We at the present day can hardly understand the keenness with which a fur coat, a good fire on the hearth, a soft bed, a glass of wine were formerly enjoyed. Johann Huizinga, The Waning of the Middle Ages, 1919. Years ago, at a retreat for therapists and meditation practitioners, a participant expressed the culturally reinforced idea that he would, at some point in the perhaps very distant future, become the person that he wanted to be, and that he would also, and also at some point in the perhaps very distant future, finally, at last, have the life that he longed for. And then he would be truly happy. Then he would be really ready to show up for his life. And most people nodded along in sympathy. They, like most of us, shared hope in the promise that the future seemed to offer. The leader, however, invited the participant to entertain a radically different notion. What if, the leader asked, this is as good as it gets? What if you'll never have more of what you want? What if you'll never be wiser, more at peace, more intelligent, more beautiful, happier, or healthier? You can imagine the reactions, the appall, the incredulity, the horror that this invitation invoked, and that you're probably feeling at least some hint of right now. Because our culture is built on the idea that the future will be better than the present, the encouraging, hopeful view that we will one day have whatever it is that we dream of, and that then, on that day, life will at last be undeniably worth living. The leader was suggesting something wholly different and altogether shocking, namely, the idea that life might already be undeniably worth showing up for exactly as it already happens to be, with all of its limitations and disagreeable elements included. The leader was proposing that we investigate our compulsive investment in the future that has not yet arrived. He was offering an alternative to our future obsession, namely, the life right in front of us right now. However, the fuel that drives our culture onward is the vague promise of a better future. We are obsessed with growth and progress, as those are seen to be the vehicles that will take us to the secularized version of the promised land. Businesses are expected to grow indefinitely. Their success is measured by how much they continue to expand. Endless technological progress is seen as inherently and obviously positive and desirable. We don't ask if the innovations are meaningfully improving our lives. We just assume that they must be. Scientific progress keeps us focused on what's next. When will they figure out a way to reverse aging? That will be the day, we think. When will AI be able to do everything that I don't like doing? Then my life will really start in earnest. But each time the future arrives, there is another future just beyond it. It turns out that the future is always mysteriously enough in the future. Thus, we are confronted with an endless series of false summits. Each subsequent summit promises to be the ultimate summit when it turns out to just be another summit. And in this way, the true future never arrives. But our belief in its imminent appearance carries on undeterred. Because the always in the future will be arrived at on the wings of growth, we in turn become growth obsessed. Indeed, because the future isn't something we can have now, we focus on what we can do now, which is to grow. Growth for the sake of a never realized future becomes growth for the sake of growth. No growth is too much growth. Each iteration of growth seems to take us closer to the end point, but the end point is forever in retreat. All the same, if something seems to be leading in the direction of growth and therefore leading in the direction of the future that we desire, we're adequately satisfied. Ah, we think to ourselves, we're all set to get what we want, eventually. But will we? See, some of us are aware that no amount of technological or scientific progress will ultimately satisfy our deepest and most human longings. In turn, some of us reject that type of growth and instead turn to what we might call personal growth or self-help, thinking that therein lies the treasure that we seek. But this isn't as radical a rejection as we might be inclined to think. We are simply replacing one vehicle that will take us to this desired future for another one. The compelling allure of the promising future itself remains firmly in place, and that is the fundamental problem. So there are two strands that I want to explore here. The first is the way that we rely on personal growth and the future that it promises us to avoid uncomfortable realities about the present moment. And the second is the way that our obsession with personal growth generates ongoing disappointment and discontent. Personal growth and its correlates, such as self actualization, personal realization, and so on, is a very ambiguous term. Indeed, I think its very vagueness is part of its appeal. The ambiguity of personal growth and self actualization makes those terms safe. Because they're undefined, they don't actually demand all that much of us. By remaining abstract and future oriented concepts, people can claim that they are pursuing them without having to articulate what exactly it is with precision that they are in fact pursuing. And therefore, they don't actually have to do much of anything. People can delude themselves into feeling productive or noble, even because they are pursuing such a lofty goal as becoming their best selves, which they achieve through working on themselves. But little do they care that they don't quite know what best self or working on myself actually means. Thus, they open up a comfortable space where no concrete actions are required of them. The only requirement to stay on the path of personal growth is simply to state that you're on it. Easy enough. Ultimately, the vague use of terms like personal growth protect us. They protect us from things that we don't like about the present moment. By framing personal growth as a future achievement, when I'm healed or once I'm living from my true self, people can let themselves off the hook in the present. They can avoid facing the present moment realities of their lives that they would rather avoid. They allow themselves to defer dealing with the unpleasant aspects of their current situation. Now, the other aspect of personal growth, the cult of personal growth that I want to talk about is when it becomes an obsession. So earlier we were talking about the way it's used as a distraction, as a tool or a means of avoidance. But now we're going to talk about the obsessive component of it, the endless engagement with self help, which is less about avoiding disturbing realities and more about a sincere belief in attaining the promise that the future seems to offer. But again, we're confronted with the vagueness, the ambiguity, the abstract nature of the terms themselves. How can we possibly know when we have attained self-actualization? When we have achieved personal growth? Are those lasting states, once grabbed hold of, forever held on to? Are they like heaven, once entered into, forever lived in? Are they feelings or are they defined by external possessions or external success, by the amount of people who like us, by the way we feel about ourselves? I think you see the problem. We imagine that life really begins once we achieve this adequate personal growth, but without having a clear way of defining what personal growth means to us, we are doomed to never realizing it and thus forever being on the endless treadmill of self help. And as long as we glorify that treadmill, as we glorify terms like personal growth, then we're doomed to forever pursuing them, endless pursuit without ultimate realization. So, in this way, the ideology of personal growth distances and distracts us from what we do have while promising us something that will never be attained. In the end, it turns out to be a recipe for persistent dissatisfaction, endless self improvement, and repeated disappointment. But I hear your objections. What is the alternative? Are you suggesting, Trevor, that we stop trying to better ourselves, that we turn away from growth, that we resign ourselves to who we are, to the way things are, that we succumb to stagnation or seep into sorrow, identify with hopelessness? That, my friends, is precisely why the creed of personal growth remains so compelling. In spite of the downsides that I've outlined here, it is, we conclude, far better than the alternatives. But it turns out that this is a rather black and white, adolescent like view of the world between the promising but forever retreating allure of the payoff of personal growth and the terrifying threat of hopelessness and stagnation is, well, where we already happen to be. It is called this, here, now. And this most immediate of moments is where life is actually occurring. At any given moment, this is all we've got. The fantasy of growth distracts us from where we are. The fantasy of hopelessness and stagnation serves the same function. So I propose that it is time that we get off the treadmill of growth, not because growth in and of itself is bad, it isn't, but because a compulsive obsession with interminable growth distracts us from the lives that we already happen to be leading. I'm speaking right now these words. Right here, right now. For me, this is my life. You, if you're still listening, are hearing these words right now. For you, right here, right now, this is your life. And maybe it's enough. I mean, maybe it's everything. Actually, in a sense, it is everything for the moment. And if it is everything, then why would we deny everything in order to obsess over the potential of a future something? So I'm not saying that we give up on growth. I'm saying that we give up our obsession with growth, our frantically cling to view of a glorious future supposedly attained by a compulsive movement towards it that is somehow always going to be better than what is here and now. Where is the evidence in my most immediate of experiences that life needs to be different than it is, or that it should be different than it is? Where's the evidence that my current level of intelligence, health, wealth, attraction, contentment, happiness isn't enough, or that somehow makes this moment of life not worth living? We don't come into the present moment. It's simply that we have to turn towards it. We simply have to turn away from the variety of things that we use to distract ourselves from it. We may not like the present moment, but does that somehow make it not worth living? We may like the vague, foggy notion we hold of the future and who will be in it, but does that somehow mean that it's worth pretending that we're not already present for the life that we already have? In my training, the leader was suggesting that through sincere investigation into the quality and the texture of our present moment experiencing, we may find no ultimate evidence of lack, no sign of incompleteness. And after our initial revulsion, we may actually find some degree of comfort in being with the only thing available to us, our current life in the current moment. From this experience of contentment grounded in the here and now, we may and most likely will choose growth. But this growth will come from a place of curiosity and fullness. It is a movement towards growth that says, why not see what else is out there? Instead of a frantically crying out, get me out of here, take me to the Holy Land type of growth. The cult of personal growth becomes a cult when its pursuit is elevated to a position of supreme importance, where chasing after it becomes a more important endeavor than being where we are, with who we are, and how we are. Personal growth and our future obsession promise us a path to real life. But there is no real life waiting for us in the future. It is this. It is now. And this realization allows us the potential to relate to our lives fully and properly. It is worthwhile to walk on this earth just as it already happens to be, just as you already happen to be. Real life is right here. It's not over there, and it's not in a year's time. And if we won't turn toward it, if we won't turn toward our lives now, then what makes us so damn certain that we'll turn toward them in the future? Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment below with any thoughts or feedback. And if you liked it, go ahead and like the video and subscribe for future content. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.